Okay, so I'm going to introduce our first moderator and speaker, and that is a good friend of mine, a member of UUFG, Dr. Zohara Simmons. She's a peace activist, a retired professor, and pretty amazing person if you don't know her. So she's sitting right here, and I'm just going to read a little bit of her background. Retired professor emerita in African American and Religious Studies and affiliated faculty in Women's Studies at the University of Florida. She obtained her BA from Antioch University in Human Service, her MA in Religious Studies, and her PhD in Islamic Studies from Temple University in Philadelphia. Simmons became active in the civil rights movement during her freshman year at Spelman College in Atlanta in 1962. She became a SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee Field Secretary 2 years later in the summer of 1964 when she joined hundreds of other college-age volunteers who traveled to Mississippi to work in the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. She also, since her primary academic focus was Islamic law and its impact on Muslim women, she's conducted research for 2 years as a Fulbright and NMERTA scholar in Jordan, Egypt, Palestine, and Syria, 1996 to 1998, on Sharia's impact on women contemporarily and in women's movements in those countries. So thank you for being the moderator.
And I am not sure, were we to speak into this mic or if I talk loudly so I don't, I'm good, all right. Thank you all for coming and thank you to Luiz for joining us from Tel Aviv. Before introducing Luiz, I just want to say a little bit about his organization. I was fortunate to meet with members of Breaking the Silence when I was there in Palestine and Israel back in 2002. Breaking the Silence, the organization that Luiz is with, is an organization of veteran soldiers who have served in the Israeli military since the start of what was called the Second Intifada, and have taken it upon themselves to expose the public, both in Israel as well as around the world, as Luiz is doing with us today, to the reality of everyday life in the occupied territories. Breaking the Silence endeavors to stimulate public debate about the price paid for a reality in which young soldiers face a civilian population on a daily basis and are engaged in the control of that population's everyday life. And their aim is to bring an end to the occupation. So you can go online and see the testimonies and read a lot about Breaking the Silence, these brave people who really often, and of course, Luiz will tell us about his organization and their work. So to introduce Luiz Aberbuj was born in Porto Alegre, Brazil, where he grew up in the heart of the Jewish community and as a member of the local Zionist Socialist Youth Movement. After taking part in a gap year leadership program in Israel in 2011, he immigrated to Israel in 2014 and then enlisted, and forgive me if I'm murdering this, the Nashon Regiment of the Kiefer Brigade, serving from 2014 to 2016, spending most of his time in the military in the West Bank, but also serving on the Gaza and Lebanon borders. After his military service, Luis testified to breaking the silence, later joining the organization's educational team as Jewish diaspora educational coordinator. Welcome, Luis. We appreciate you coming. Ooh,
Whoa.
what is it?
Just share the screen the right time, right?
Thank you.
So thank you for the presentation. Yeah, can you hear me all?
Yes.
Yes, can you see also? I'll put it like that. Or I can.
Luis, I'm gonna
Nice. So
microphone, so we're not gonna speak over you.
okay, thank you very much. So thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you all for your presence and for your willingness to hear me break my silence here also with you and talk about this very complex and very painful reality that we are living for the at least 60, almost 60 years with the beginning of the occupation, but mainly I think this year in this very sensitive time, very emotional time, is still very important to ask the hard questions and to try to generate a dialogue and conversation about the reality in Israel and Palestine. So thank you very much. So I'm Luiz Aberbuj. I am 32 years old. As was mentioned, I was born in Brazil, in Porto Alegre, in southern Brazil. There we have the third biggest Jewish community there, which doesn't make it really big, right? In the end, just a few thousand Jews in the city, and compared with the local population, is of course very, very small. But I basically grew up doing everything that a young Jewish boy in the diaspora can do. I studied in the Jewish school. I grew up in a synagogue, took part in the conservative movement. My family took it very seriously, all this issue of Jewish identity, connection with Israel, of course. And for me, it was also, everything was very symbolic and had a lot of representation in my life. But definitely, the most impactful element of my Jewish life in Brazil was the youth movement. So I grew up in the Zionist socialist youth movement, and there is the place where I like to say that there I started my politicization. I became very ideological. For me, all the ideology context made a lot of sense to me, and I really felt connected with Israel and with my Jewish identity. But all these elements, of course, they were built together with a lot of liberal and progressive values, right? So in my mind, all these two perspectives, they were one actually. And of course, that growing up in a community and of course in the youth movement, we talked a lot about the politics, the history, the wars, the conflict with Palestinians, of course, about the occupation too. But from so far away in Brazil, it's really hard to grasp and to really understand what it really means in the daily life of millions of Palestinians living under occupation, or even for Israelis that sometimes as soldiers or settlers, what it really means, like occupation, right? So in my Navy perspective of growing up so far away of Israel, but at the same time feeling so connected, in my mind, there was those areas where the Palestinians they live, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and unfortunately, we need to do what we had to do, right? They want to kill us. They have terror organizations. They want to push us to the sea, and they are very violent. So, of course, that they would prefer to state peace, diplomacy, but we don't have partner for that, right? That's the basic essence of the narrative. And I was very critical, like without even fully understanding, but again, growing up, it is a very two-state solution. And through the youth movement, I came to Israel for the first time in this gap year program, which the idea is to have this ideological experience here in Israel. So we did a lot of social work. We work in kibbutzim. We study a lot Hebrew history, wars, politics. We met a lot of different organizations and people. And I remember that in the program, at some point, one of the presentations we had was with this guy that was a soldier, and he served in a special, in an elite unit of the Israeli army, and he shared his experiences of his service and the conclusions he reached after all his meeting with the reality. For me, that was a really touching meeting and presentation. It really got stuck in my mind and my memory. It caused me to ask a lot of questions. Even though at the time I was only 19 years old, I didn't live here, or still didn't came to live here. But that presentation really moved me. And the program continued. Then after that, I came back to Brazil, stayed there for a few years, working in the youth movement and within the Jewish community. And then in 2014, I decided, okay, now is the time. I want to go to Israel to live there and to fulfill this ideology that's completely made sense. Of course, I instantly fell in love with Israel, everything connected to me. And I knew that at the time I was 21 years old, the army would be a question, right? They'll probably call me. But again, in my mind, it wasn't even a question. I was very sure that I want to serve. Of course, I will be a combat fighter. And I was very proud of it. It was very symbolical to me. Of course, I was also the first member of my family that served, so it was even more symbolical. My family, everyone was proud, and you can see me here in the swearing ceremony in the Western Wall. So everything was very representative, and me, in my mind, it was very clear that, okay, I'm going to defend Israel, to arrest terrorists, to save lives, and to do what I need to do to protect Israel, right? And then I arrived to serve the Fear Brigade, one of the units of the Israeli brigade, of the Israeli infantry, sorry. And very fast through my service, I started to ask a lot of questions, right? So one of the motivations to come and serve and to live in Israel was, of course, to also reach my own conclusions as that soldier who I spoke a few years before did. And all my life I was teach about everything that's going on here in a lot of different perspectives, and I want to reach my own conclusions too. And those questions really fast started to bother me, and I started to really try to understand how some things we were doing were related to security at all. How does some things bring security to Israel? Like, for example, sometimes we were entering houses just to train how to enter in a house in the middle of the night, and then you wake up all the family, the kids start to cry, and then you ask yourself, okay, why you did that? And that's for training. Or sometimes why you're entering this house and there's nothing there. We're supposed to find something, to find weapons, to find something where the information comes. Or sometimes why the settler is giving orders to my commander. He's a civilian, and how does this bring security? Or sometimes we're also arresting Palestinian workers that are trying to pass to Israel so they can work. And all those questions really started to bother me, and I started to understand that things are much more complex than simply security, right? And the moment that I call it, the moment that it broke the camel's back, it was in Hebron. We're posted in a settlement, living together with settlers, soldiers, and Israeli civilian settlers in the middle of an occupation zone. And one day, me and my team commander, we are instructed to open a check post in the middle of the road, the street close to us, in the route, in the direction to the Tomb of the Patriarchs. A check post is basically like a checkpoint, but a mobile one. And you can open it wherever you like, in the streets, in the road, you can stop people, you can stop cars, and you have this mobility to use it. And we're instructed to check all the male in military age from 18 to 45 years old, more or less. Women and children are free to pass. But then suddenly something happened and we didn't know how to deal with that. And a few dozen meters from us, there was this Palestinian school, and the children started to gather in the exit. They finished their classes, the bells start to ring, and they start to go in the direction of their homes. And we had this wave of children running in our direction, and we didn't really know what to do, because we just know that you have a lot of pressure on your shoulders, right? You know, as a soldier, you're the last obstacle between anything that can happen and the people you're ready to protect. And and to keep the order and keep the tranquility in your area. So we had this micro discussion about what to do, what we're gonna do now, and we decided, okay, now we're gonna check the children's bag, right? We're not willing to hurt them, not willing to make them afraid or something, but I would just want to make sure that nothing will happen on my turn here in my time of protection. And then we put the children in line and we started to open their bags. And me in my mind, again, I was this progressive guy. I'm the good soldier. I can show that's different, right? It's this very Navy understanding of the situation. And very softly open their bags and making sure and letting them there's nothing there, and letting them pass. And then suddenly this guy who was walking close to us, and he saw that scene and he became very, very angry, started to scream at us and to say like, what you're doing, they're only children. Do you really think they are a threat? Like this guy who was speaking in English, in the end, I understood that he was a Dutch activist that was passing in the street during the day. And in that moment, he really touched my soldier ego, right? Like, I am the authority. Who do you think you are? Don't know who are their parents. Don't know who are their teachers. Don't know who prepared their bags. Who were in this school. I need to make sure. And we are screaming at each other. Am I asking for his ID and like trying to somehow explain why this is logical, right? But then suddenly something flipped a coin in my mind, in my head, and I understood that I'm not simply justifying to this guy why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? I'm justifying to myself, because I didn't came from the other side of the world I left my family in Brazil and came to Israel and became a soldier, like to stop children in the middle of the streets and being this kind of policeman that enables the policy of military occupation, which is basically a military dictatorship. So of course that also means a lot to my Latin origins and our South American trauma with military dictatorship. So it also played a role in my understanding of the situation I was in. After a few moments, this guy went, the kids pass, and that moment really got stuck with me, like stopping the children and checking their bags. So after my service, and not a lot of other questions and situations, I decided to also testify to breaking the silence. And as was mentioned, nowadays I work mainly with Jewish communities abroad, because we really believe that this discussion is absolutely necessary and important for Jewish communities nowadays that are absolutely related, of course, with everything that happens here, because everything that happens here is being made also in our names and names of the Jewish people all around the world. So who are we breaking the silence? Very fast, I'll try to explain a little bit what we're doing and who we are, and just correcting a little bit what was mentioned in the beginning. The organization was established in the end of in the aftermath of the Second Intifada, in the end of 2004. Intifada was this period that started in September 2000, and for three and a half years, there were a lot of waves of violence in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories. Of course, a lot of military violence and settler violence in the West Bank and in Gaza, but also a lot of terror attacks inside of in Israel. So a lot of blood and a lot of pain during those times. And this group of soldiers from the 50th Battalion of the Nahal Brigade, who were serving in Hebron at the time, they found this huge gap between the reality they were dealing with during their daily life as soldiers and the discussions and narratives that Israeli society were following. And they understood that this huge gap exists because our people are not really willing to see if further than the official narrative, which is everything security, we are protecting ourselves, it's necessary, there's nothing else we can do, and what was really going on. So they wanted to fill this gap, right? So to break this official narrative and to bring the voices of soldiers to generate a new discussion around. And everything started with a photo exhibition in Tel Aviv. What was named Breaking the Silence, bringing Hebron to Tel Aviv. And it was a huge success. And there they met with other people that served in other areas. And they told them very similar stories. And they started to identify patterns and to start to identify elements of how the occupation works and how this is not simply a security issue, how it's not simply a defensive issue. There's also an agenda behind it, right? An agenda that denies Palestinians their basic rights and, of course, instrumentalizes the Israelis as soldiers who must live their lives to killing and dying and fighting to fulfill this no-end war with this very fanatical ideology of keeping the occupation going on and so on. But so then nowadays, our organization, we are more than 1,500 soldiers, testifiers who broke their silence and talk about the reality they met in the occupied territories. And we work mainly with our testimony collection team, of course, bringing this voice, generating this discussion, questioning where our red moral lines as society, and until when we can, like, people are expecting to keep this insane reality of violence going on. Another way that we work is, of course, our educational projects, like lectures like that, presentations, testimony, reading meetings, and our tours, educational tours in Hebron and in the South Hebron Hills. So, we as organization, we definitely our struggle is it's fighting against the military occupation. But what I mean by that, we can see this in the small map. This is the result of the 48-49 war, which for Israelis is the War of Independence, and in the lighter area we have the result of this war, the new established state of Israel. And at the time, the West Bank was still under Jordan rule, was annexed by Jordan, and the Gaza Strip was under Egyptian rule, and the Golan Heights was under Syrian rule as well, right? That's the result for 49. A few years later, we jumped to 67. We have the 6-day war, where Israel conquers a lot of territory. All those territories that I mentioned, also is Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and also the Sinai Peninsula, right? And immediately after the conquest of these territories, Israel declares a state of temporary military occupation, right? What does that mean? That means that when it is a status on international law, right? It's not something that Israel invented. We are not the first ones, and I believe we will not be the last ones, unfortunately. But this is the situation where foreign force conquer an area and keep their army controlling their area with the population, local population living there, until we expect a political solution for this situation, right? For the aftermath of a war, right? And Israel does that. In the case of Golan Heights in East Jerusalem, of course, that it's a very complex cases. There's not fully recognized internationally, but theoretically, Israel annexes those parts of the territory, and it's a case study by itself. And I'm not entering in that too much today. As I mentioned, very polemical and very interesting discussion. But technically, Israel, how to say it, retires the military occupation of those areas. Again, with all those questions that came with that. The Sinai Peninsula, we reached the peace accords with Egypt in the end of the 70s, and where we returned those lands to Egypt, and these agreements they hold until today, right? Proving that, like, diplomacy and talking and doing politics, sometimes that can hold more than military solutions, right? But the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, they still are under this policy of military occupation, which means that the sovereign power in these regions, they are definitely defined by the state of Israel, the Israeli army, right? Meaning, as I mentioned before, that the rule in the occupied territories is a military rule. It's not a democracy. It's a very hierarchical military dictatorship that Palestinians are living under it. And of course, that the rule in these cases, they are not democratically elected representatives. They create rules. They are military orders that some officers in their offices, they decide that will be the policy for the day, right? So we'll now give another jump in time. We arrive in the beginning of the 90s after the first Intifada, then the beginnings of the discussion around Oslo. I will not enter Oslo too much, just mention that Oslo was a first step agreement, not really a peace agreement. It was a let's start talking and recognize each other so then we can start a diplomatic relationship. Of course, we know that unfortunately things didn't go the way as was planned. Rabin was assassinated and the things they were actually like frozen and didn't reach the end that was planned. But what's important to mention is the division of the land that holds sometimes is applied until today. Areas A, B, and C, being areas A, 18% of the West Bank. There we have Palestinian Authority. They have some level of autonomy, like municipality level, and Palestinian police that, of course, works in full coordination and cooperation with the Israeli army. Then we have areas B, which are 22% of the West Bank, and they are the peripheral areas of this main city centers. And there they also have this kind of very, very small municipality level autonomy. And there the Israeli army controls anything related to security. And we have area C, where most of the settlements are, and they are 60% of the West Bank, and those areas are under full control of the IDF, right? So nowadays we're talking about 3.2 million Palestinians living in the West Bank, almost 500,000 settlers, and 2.3 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. And after that, of course, I just short mention about Gaza, right? In the Israeli narrative nowadays, a lot of people believe that we left the Gaza Strip after the disengagement in 2005, but actually the occupation keeps going on through the policy of the siege. We control everything that enters, it goes in and goes out from the Gaza Strip, also the sea, air, and land borders, right? And of course, it's made with in cooperation with the Egyptian army from their side of the border. And of course, cycles of fighting that we have been seeing since then, being this one that is still going on. Another example of how this idea that we can manage the conflict and can keep controlling millions of Palestinians militarily, it's a policy that keeps exploding in our face. So before we go to the fun part, which is the Q&A, and then we can talk a bit more, just try to bring a few testimonies and try to very shortly explain about a few aspects or principles that guides our activity as soldiers in the territories. And to that, I'll try to read very fastly a few testimonies that explain and exemplifies these ideas. So this first testimony is from a first sergeant from the Crossings Military Police, like serving the checkpoints in the West Bank in the East Jerusalem area in 2018. And he tells us, when I got to the checkpoints, I have a hard time finding single people who are willing to look at the passers-by there as human beings. I grew up in a kibbutz. Most of the people there are from Meretz Party. Meretz Party is a very classical Zionist left-wing party here in Israel, very related with the kibbutz movement. And he continues, I came from a bubble of liberalism. I knew back in the high school about occupation, the problematic nature of it, and all this shit. I didn't want to enlist at all. But I imagine that most people, even if they are not too involved in politics, do not have a strong opinion against Arabs, concrete racism. When I got to the checkpoint, I had trouble finding even a single person who were willing to look at the passersby there as equals and human beings. And I couldn't understand it. From a young age, we talk about the media, we talk about education, we talk about history lessons, whose whole essence from beginning to end is actually to show you that you are persecuted. In Spain, you're persecuted. In Russia, we're persecuted. Pogroms, Holocaust. This is really a course to train you for this mentality that you are persecuted, that you are the only one who can protect the country and your people. In this kind of slow and deliberated brainwash. In our training, we don't touch on morality at all. A little of respect and be suspicious. 1.5 lessons of such, don't be shitty. Really just a bit like this. And even there, you have the commanders who tell you, what does it matter? Get them. They are all terrorists. That's it. You get to the checkpoint and that's all you know. It's not talked too much that they are also human beings and most of them come into work, and there's no reason to think that every human being who comes to you is automatically suspected of being a terrorist. An 18-year-old boy knows nothing about his life. They took him from school and put him at the checkpoint. You have a responsibility, both a security responsibility of making sure the terrorists don't enter, and also the human responsibility that Palestinians people come to you, and you are the face of Israel, so to speak. These things are full of responsibility for a child. To that, add the whole story that the hours are not normal, and I can personally testify that during my entire service, I would sleep maybe 2 or 3 hours a day for 3 years. Many soldiers could not cope with this stress, and I think a lot of it stems from that. It's easy to say they are shit, and it's hard for us. Instead to look and be empathetic. So I think the soldiers, he touches a lot of things in this testimony. I personally feel very identified because exactly as he said, like I also grew up in this very liberal and progressive surroundings, and never met this as I mentioned, the concrete racist, like from so far away was like even harder. But I really also feel that it's very interesting that they mentioned the weaponizing of our trauma, of our culture, of our education, to justify what's going on, and it really touches me. But what I wanted to talk about this testimony specifically is how we as soldiers, and what the soldier describes in this testimony, how we as soldiers understand the Palestinian population, the civil Palestinian population around us. And for us as a soldier, in our soldier mentality, we have the Palestinians are divided in 2 groups. The first one are those who are involved in terror activities, and therefore they are a threat by definition that must be eliminated, controlled, however you prefer, and are those who are uninvolved in terror activity. But those who are uninvolved in terror activities, they are potential threats. Why? Because you as a soldier dealing with civilian population in your daily life, you don't know to identify from where the threat will come necessarily. It's not that every day in the West Bank is like October 7th, and then you can see a full equipped terrorist and you can know, oh, this is a threat. For example, I served during 2015, we had the stabbing intifada, it was called. You cannot necessarily know from where a stabbing can come. Can be an old lady, can be a pregnant woman, can be an old senior citizen, can be a young guy. So those who are uninvolved, they are potential threats, and you must be aware of it, right? And the idea of an innocent Palestinian, it's something that are terms that we not deal with because it's not relevant to us as a soldier, right? Soldier, we are executive institution, right? We are applying what was defined as the law by the system of the military occupation, right? And it's not relevant to us. So we see them as involved or uninvolved, meaning threats or potential threats, right? But then it opens a new question. How do you control millions of potential threats, right? How hard is it to do this? How do you control to generate this deterrence and to try to avoid a situation where you have threats? So to do that, we use the second principle, the principle of the presence demonstration. That's exactly what I'm doing here in this picture. entered an apartment. It was a abandoned building. We entered there, we took the windows, and now we are using this apartment as a place to spot the road and protect the area we were doing around, being felt, being seen, passing the idea that we are at all the places all the time. You can run, but you can hide. Don't mess with us. We are here. Like the classic showing off of security to try to generate this deterrent, right? But sometimes the presence demonstration also generates a few situations that generate a few moral questions, like this case here. Also a first sergeant from the engineering corps from the 605 Battalion in the Hebron area, serving from 2006 to 2008. And he said, today they can take water. Where do you put them? The interviewer asked. There is like Route 60. Route 60 is a route that cuts the West Bank from north to south, the classical biblical road that exists to today. And you have a point that it reach close to, it arrives in Hebron. And the soldier is telling, there's like Route 60, just maybe a kilometer south of the Al-Fuar intersection. About a kilometer or even half a kilometer south of there was something called the pools. That's what they call it. It was actually a spring of flowing fresh water, and many of the Palestinians filled water there in big quantities, 40 to 50 liters of water. I figure out that either they didn't have clean water for everyone or something like that. Elderly people would come with 50 liters gallons, many times would help them carry water back and forth. But they put us there because it is considered an area prone to stone throwing on the road. And once or twice during the catching of the line, that's the in Hebrew expression to when you are in a specific line, specific area of the territories, doing the protection of the area. So during the catching of the line, stones were thrown, and the company commander announced, today they cannot take water. Whoever tries to take water, then a weapon is pointed at him and he leaves. Following the throwing of stones, they decided to not allow them to take water from the spring. Yes, although in practice we didn't care, we disdain, yes, but the order was that they should not take water. And why? As the company commander, because this is considered a place of throwing stones. You know who decided the order? I think it was a company order level decision. It seems to me that he simply did not want the physical presence of Arabs in the place at all, because he said there is stone throwing there. If there were no Arabs, there would be no stone throwing. So was there stone throwing from there? Stones were thrown from there, not much. If by chance a Palestinian now comes and a company commander team is there, you tell him, he's disappointed and leaves. Again, it seems to me that in these villages, they do not have clean water. This is their only source of water. People would come with these things of Eden water. Eden is a very popular water company here, which is like 25 liters. And very old people just carry it. So yes, for the man, it was once in this day or once in his week that he would come and bring clean water that he would have for the whole week. So it's like now some 25-year-old boy, our company commander, decides that, good, so today you won't have water. Go shower in mud, drink mud, washing your hands in the toilet. It's not that any of them responded to me with some violence or something like that, but they make a sad face. To let them take water, I don't remember that there was an order to let them take water. So this is the idea of the presence demonstration, is that if that means that we will take an area and we will sterilize this area, that's the term we use also as a soldier, like making this area clean of the presence of Palestinians, even if that denies them the right to use local sources of water. And close to this area that the soldier mentioned is close to the South Hebron Hills, is a very poor area, right? We have very poor and simple communities of Palestinian Falahim, people that are living like the same lifestyle for hundreds of years, and they suffer a lot from the consequences of this kind of policy. And the last aspect that I would like to discuss with you today, and then we can jump into questions, is the aspect of the settler violence. So as I mentioned, we have the military rule for Palestinians in the territories, but of course that Israeli settlers, they are not living under the same set of rules. And actually they live, and also any Israeli that passes the green line and reach any settlement or any point in the West Bank, we are like protected by this bubble of Israeli sovereignty that guarantees to us our democratic rights. And Palestinians don't have that. So we have two different systems of law for two different nationalities. And we all know how this is called, right? And the discussion around apartheid is something that for a long time ago has been existing about what's going on in the West Bank, the separation by the law based on their nationality. And this separation of the law generates a situation of impunity, right? Because for the soldier, it's very clear who's speaking Hebrew, who's speaking Arabic, who you are protecting, and who is the enemy, right? So also settlers, they work really hard to recruit the soldiers ideologically through a lot of different ways, right? But it's very clear to whom you are closer, and very hardly settler violence against Palestinians, which is by definition under authority of the Israeli army to apply the law against settlers. That's something that we almost don't talk about, and we don't really do that. And in general, the culture in the army says that if you see settler doing something, you must call the police, right? But the police in the territories, which is not Israeli police, by the way, because as I mentioned before, Israel never fully officially annexed the occupied territories. So therefore, they have the Judean Samaria police who works under the authority of the army, right? What's the problem? The problem is that this department of the police, Judean Samaria police, they suffer from the biggest lack of work power, like human resources, people working, and the smallest investment from the government. And the policemen themselves, they're settlers too. So in a lot of cases, they know the settlers who are being violent. And in a lot of situations, almost like 90% of them, like the law is not really applied. And even if it's applied later then to the bureaucracy, and nothing really happens. And one of these cases is, I can use, for example, is the entrances to Joseph's tomb in Shechem. Shechem is one of the biggest Palestinians. Shechem is the Hebrew name, right? In the city of Nablus, Palestinian city of Nablus, right? Is one of the biggest Palestinian cities in the West Bank. And there we have Joseph's tomb. Joseph from the Bible, the guy with the 12 brothers and the beautiful clothes, right? And according to Jewish tradition, this guy, Joseph, he is buried in Nablus, in Shechem. So once a month, the army, they grant permits to settlers to go there and pray. Of course, that demands a full military activity. We close and sterilize full sectors of the city to make possible to settlers to reach the tomb and pray there. And in my experience, I had a small confrontation with a group of settlers. They were clearly trying to generate a provocation and try to provoke Palestinians there. And even to me, there as a soldier protecting them, they started to call me a traitor, that I came to protect the Arabs, that who I think I am, that I'm a leftist, and that I hate Israel, just because I asked them to keep quiet and stop their provocations. We have also here another testimony of a soldier telling about this same event that he also participated, but is in his experiences. He tells us that they arrived before as a military team. They start to throw stun grenades so they can trigger possibly rioters even before of the arrival of settlers, which is also a very weird experience. I will jump a little bit that so we can go to questions. And just to finish, my conclusion after my military experience and after dealing with the struggle and against occupation, civil society here in Israel and Palestine, solidarity movements, and being present in the territories for a good part of my week in the last times, I understood that it's not a black and white game. It's not us or them. Definitely I understood that it's impossible to generate a normal reality controlling millions of people militarily. I understood that, of course, it's immoral and we are denying rights for Palestinians. And at the same time, it doesn't really bring security to Israel, right? We can see that we never had security. The wars keep going on. And we are seeing the instrumentalization of the situation by politicians and leaders and decision makers to fulfill their political interests, using our pain, our trauma to justify everything that's going on. And things doesn't really need to be like that. Really needs to change, and mainly after this year and after all this traumatic year and the chaos and the war, the destruction, and all the deaths that been until now, we must understand that we reach a point of no return. The things, like as we know from before, they are not the same, and we need to talk about it. And that's the message we're trying to bring to Israeli society and Jewish people abroad, and anyone willing to hear and talk about that, because that's one of our biggest problems as human society nowadays. So to finish, this is a picture of in Hebron. You can see the Palestinian kids playing, the soldier making his guard, and the Palestinian kids, they play the reality as any other kids. They play the reality they know, a reality of arrestings, weapons, soldiers, and we really need to change that. So be very happy to answer your questions, and thank you very much. Follow us.
Thank you so much, Luiz. That was really enlightening, and really appreciate your testimony and being here with us today. So my name's Yakin. I'm with JVP, and I'll be helping moderate our in-person Q&A as well as making sure our online people get their questions in as well. So
What is JDP?
what's that? Oh, JVP is Jewish Voice for Peace. We're the organization in the back. You get T-shirts. You can talk to Meryl Becker to learn more about us. But I'll be moderating our questions, making sure everything runs smoothly. So you can come up. I'll call on you to come up to the microphone and ask your question. Trying to make sure we get to as many people as we can. And so helping us do that, just keep your question as succinct as you can. Questions only. If we have time at the end, we will have maybe some reflections on why we came here today. We'll be able to voice a little bit of our reaction about what we've heard. But for now, just keep it to a question so we can get to everybody. So we'll try to alternate our in-person and our online so that everyone kind of gets a voice in here. But we can go ahead and get started. So just raise your hand and come up here to the mic. With the mic. To the mic. And
Go to the mic.
with the mic.
Okay. Oh.
Thank you for your presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
I have two questions. In your opinion, what percentage of Israelis have a clear understanding of what Israel is doing in the West Bank and Gaza? And why is that? That's my first question. And if I may ask the second one, is your movement in the military affiliated with the Refusnik movement? Have soldiers and ex-soldiers ever joined and marched with the protesters? If so, what was the response of the press and the Israeli people? And if not, could you explain why? And how many current military personnel are affiliated with your movement? Two short questions, I'm sorry.
That's okay. They're really good questions. So the first part, like it's hard to give an exact answer about percentages, but I really feel that to answer your question, the key word here is narrative, right? I understand that in one hand, there is this myth that all Israelis are soldiers, right? Mainly nowadays, that's not so true. Like all these 18-year-olds who draft, like half of them will serve in combat, only half of them will serve in combat roles in the army. And from all those combat roles, only half of them are really inside of the occupied territories and really applying the policy of occupation in the daily life. So I think that's depending where you are, from where you are here in Israel, which kind of Israeli you are, which kind of religious affiliation, if you have one. Like the Israeli society is very tribalized, and we have like communities where a lot of religious people live, and we have secular communities, and we have a lot of this differentiation. So I think that most of people, more than not really knowing what's going on, they simply follow the official narrative that everything is made for security. And as I mentioned, of course, that demands a very cynical use of our trauma as Jewish people, right? We as Jewish people, we are pretty sure, I'm pretty sure that we are not the most loved people in the world. And we have a very traumatic past. But to use that and weaponizing that politically to justify what's going on and to silencing voices of discussion within Israel and all around, I think that also nowadays, that's one very important point of discussion, right? The use of anti-Semitism of a tool for silencing, and at the same time, real anti-Semitism not being addressed. So, of course, that we as Breaking the Silence and all the civil society and other movements and organizations, we have partners, we have supporters, we have people who are aware, and we are trying doing our best to keep spreading this awareness. But to fight the official narrative that includes also, as I mentioned, the use of our trauma and also religious argumentations and religious justifications, it's a paradigm that is really hard to break, but at the same time is absolutely necessary. So we, of course, in the last 20 years as an organization, we passed through a lot and a lot of antagonism, and it's really hard to talk about occupation, because just to use the word occupation, it's a big taboo. It generates a lot of defensiveness in the people. So I think that we really need to look forward for the future and to really ask ourselves as Israelis, what kind of reality we really want here, right? Because, and also until when, as I mentioned before, right? Until when, right? Okay, so we're living this no-end war that we keep controlling people, denying them rights. What you're expecting that's going to happen, right? In all cases in history, this kind of situations generates violence, right? So you cannot, in one hand, have this narrative that we always try peace and we always look forward to it, but we don't have partners, and at the same time keep the policy of the occupation going on and on and on, and denying Palestinian their basic rights, and even not even recognize them as an ethnic group, as a nationality, as a group, a legitimate social group. So that's I think that's one of the difficulties to break the paradigm and to fight against these official narratives that there are here in Israel. And your second part about the refusal movements, of course that we have contact and we know people from different refusing movements here in Israel, and in general they are parts, like, of course, of the camp against the occupation. But we as organization, we don't promote necessarily a refusal, like something that, of course, that is valid, is a valid, legitimate way to protest. We don't, we just don't say that, okay, let's do that, but we understand that even a few testifiers who find this a legitimate and good tool to protest their non-concordance with the politics in the West Bank and Gaza Strip.
Hi, Luis. Thanks again for being here today. I've actually had the pleasure of seeing you speak before. I'm still a little confused about your group, because having followed this issue for many years, and obviously very much so in the last couple of years, I have not seen any evidence of any pro-Palestinian group in Israel. B'Tselem, the largest human rights organization, is pretty much down to nothing. and even your group, from what I understand, probably would not be considered a pro-Palestinian group. There aren't pro-Palestinian protests, from what I understand, even with the huge thousands of people protesting to return the hostages and against the judiciary reforms that Netanyahu is trying to make. I think any protest in favor of the Palestinians is not allowed and is illegal, and you're not even allowed to carry or to fly a Palestinian flag. So first of all, do you consider yourself a pro-Palestinian group? Are you fighting for Palestine to be free? Or are you just writing down testimonies of what it's like? Who is fighting for Palestine? And whoever is doing it, from my vantage point, is not doing a very good job. Nothing personal, but the vast, vast majority of Israelis do not consider Palestinians human.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, do you consider yourself a pro-Palestinian group? Is that your goal? To save the lives of Palestinians and to end the occupation? It's not complex.
In this case, I don't have absolutely any problem with this definition, but I just wanted to think is a very important point that you were bringing, and we as organization, we at any moment we are saying or pretending to say that we have the solution, right? I'm not saying that I come here with the absolute truth, and I'm not saying here that what is the absolute way to solve the conflict, to end the occupation, to save Palestinian lives. And our objective as group, since the beginning, the establishment of the organization, was, of course, using part of our privilege as Israelis to bring this debate and to try to change things and within the Israeli society and have this educational approach. So I don't have any problem in defining myself as a pro-Palestinian, in the sense that, of course, I believe they are a legitimate social group, they are legitimate nationality, they are people that exist and must have their rights exactly as anyone else living in an equal system, right? But we as a group, we are talking as organization, we talks about something which is a very niche inside of a very complex and very difficult to understand reality that is inside, like talking about this occupation since 67. Of course, we have to talk about 48. Of course, we must talk about the beginning of nationalist movements in the end of the 19th century. All those discussions will be necessary. They are very important, and they will need to exist in a process with Palestinians as equal, so then we can develop somehow peace in the end of occupation. But here in Israel, we are also, as you mentioned, and you probably know, we are fighting against very strong forces, and is very difficult, mainly nowadays, because a lot of reasons. We have a very polarized and radicalized society. That's not a problem, that's a global problem, I would say. And a lot of people try to silence, and it's really hard to deal with a lot of stuff. The governments, they try to intimidate also groups that are trying to show solidarity with Palestinians. So I'm not promoting any specific kind of solution or any kind of absolute truth, but I think that I can talk from my perspective, from my side, why those things are not moral, not human, not logical. They're not related simply with security, based on my military experience from living here, and also the voices of the 1,500 soldiers that also talk about that. That are willing to break their silence and to have this discussion. And it's really hard. It's really hard, as I mentioned. But just to point out, of course, that inside of the civil society movements and movements against occupation and movements with solidarity with Palestinians, we have a lot of different groups, and we have people that absolutely define themselves pro-Palestinians. And look, in the end, I would say that the solution will not be black and white, right? Will not be something in absolute values. Will be something that must need to be pragmatic and realistic and based on solidarity and in egalitarian values. And that's what I think we try to do, right?
Thank you. We better let other people appreciate that.
I do want to make sure that we're letting our online people get some input. So I'm going to ask one of our questions that came from the chat. This is a very simple question, but maybe one that's more complicated to answer. Are you safe?
Like here in Israel in general, like
That was all that was part of the question. And if the question asker wants to clarify in the chat, they can. But yeah, that's kind of my own curiosity. Like, what does safety look like for you when doing this work?
yeah, definitely there are some risks that I personally don't feel them so much for a lot of reasons. For the fact that I'm a new immigrant, not so new, but I'm an immigrant that I came from abroad. So I came from this very, as I mentioned, very progressive base, a Jewish progressive base. And here we really met other faces of Israeli society and much more radical narratives. And so for me, I was always very vocal about my opinions, and I don't really feel, but of course that we don't feel safe in the context of that we are always in this war, right? Keeping the occupation alive, controlling millions of Palestinians, of course, that will generate violence. And sometimes we have the cycles of battles and fighting, and we are always constantly living this security issue. So in this sense, like, I cannot say that I'm safe. Mainly after October 7, that was very clear. Everything exploded in our face based on this idea that of the Israeli government that it's possible to keep managing that without any real consequence. So in general, I say yes, I feel safe. But we works a lot in the territories and during our tours, and also we have a lot of Palestinian partners that we work with them, and always is important for us to bring their voice to, right? Not only bring our voices as soldiers who apply the law, but also bring the Palestinian voices during our tours and a lot of different educational meetings. So in the territories, when we are there closer to the army, closer to settlers, sometimes the things got a bit hot, but I would say that nowadays, compared to the past of the beginning of the organization, it's something that got control.
Is there another question from the audience? And I'll go to our online questions.
Hi, my name's Marilyn. I'm with FSJP. I first just want to say something that wasn't said in the presentation was what happened in 1948. It was called the Nakba. It was the catastrophe. It was when almost 1 million Palestinians were raped and pillaged and forced to leave their homeland. And what happened with the Intifadas was ostensibly a nonviolent movement. And if this is your first time learning about the history of Palestine and the Israeli occupation, what you just heard was from the perspective of an Israeli settler. So it's important to go beyond that. So if this is really your first exposure, go deeper. But my question for you is, in the past, I think it's important that you're speaking because when there has been movements to overthrow an oppressive government, it has always been preceded by people defecting from the army that is oppressing the people on that land. It happened in Haiti, it happened in Russia, it happened in Cuba. Every single revolution for independence has happened that way. So I guess, what do you feel is your role in liberating the Palestinian people and fighting for their independence? And so, yeah, what are you doing to try to make more people defect from the IOF in Israel?
Yeah, I would like to start to answer that by saying that, of course, as I mentioned before, of course that there is a lot to be discussed, right? 48, Nakba, those things are a fundamental part of the discussion, and I believe that in the moment that hopefully the military occupation of the territories will end through a honest process, we will have to sit and ask those hard questions. And sometimes we may not agree, sometimes we may agree, sometimes we may find an equilibrium in the different narratives, and the discussion is absolutely necessary, right? We as organization, we specifically focus in the 67 war and its consequentially occupation of the territories, because mainly is the political system and the policy that I took part and that I implemented. So in the sense that that's my speaking place, and I talk about this reality that I implemented as a soldier, right? And when I mean that this organization, we don't promote for any specific solution, it's not because like I don't have any perspective of what we would like to see, but because first of all, there are lots of different organizations and movements within Palestinian society, within Israeli society. They are discussing, they have their own proposals and perspectives and ways to try to reach a kind of solution that will guarantee rights and security to everyone from the river to the sea, right? But unfortunately, as we look at the situation within Israeli society nowadays, is that we are not at the historical point to discuss about solution, but we are in the historical point to understand that we have a problem, right? Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the official narrative and the discussion within Israeli society, there is spaces where there's a lot of negationism, people denying, a lot of denial, right? A lot of threat of silencing of this discussion. So what I try to do is and we as organization, is of course to press the society the maximum we can to have these discussions and to be open and to understand that it's not black and white, we or them. But one thing that's by any means I mean to delegitimize what you say or something like that, I just must point out that, as I mentioned, of course, that will be resistance, that will be violence, that would happen in all liberation movements, that will happen in all history of the occupations. But the second Intifada, which was the moment, I would say, the historical pivotal point in history, that was the beginning of the process that we see, because the occupation changes itself. Of course, it develops during the years, like 67, changes its way of acting a little bit, but it's definitely since the second Intifada that the things really got deeper in the occupation policy. Expansion of settlements, more violence, more non-compliance of the law on settlers, and all these consequences. And that happened, and I think that the point is we don't need like to try to erase other perspective by like saying that the Intifada wasn't violent. Like, it was a very violent period for everyone, and that was the beginning of the narratives that definitely gave power and legitimacy for the how to say it, for the ascension of the Israeli extreme right wing, which now are in power, right? So I really believe that, unfortunately, that a political symbiosis between the hardcore extreme right-wing Canonist settlers parties and movements, and the violence of these very jihadist and more extremist movements within the Palestinian resistance. So I think that the Israel and Palestine and the Middle East in general is a place where maybe theories fall down and things got really complex, because we are talking about one of the places that is the place of the birth of civilization, society, human societies in general. And what I do is promote, of course, dialogue, education, bringing the reality to Israeli society, promoting this discussion that if we don't change, right, things will get really worse. But they are already immoral and absolutely unacceptable, mainly after all these years of war crimes, destruction in Gaza, genocide, killings, and all this, the attack that has been there. And it's very clear for us, for me at least, and that's what we're trying to bring to Israeli society too, that all these elements are being used to fulfill political interests of specific sectors of society and politic groups. So it's complex. It's much more complex than it seems. But as I see the occupation as a violent way to control Palestinians and a violent policy, and I fight against that. For me, it's hard to say that extremists, violent resistance will be the solution. I don't think that Hamas achieved too much for the Palestinians too, and that's because it made possible for these very extreme narratives within Israeli society to get a legitimation, to being legitimized, and it's a phenomena that it's really hard to fight, very difficult.
So we have another question from the chat. It's a little bit of a longer one. Says, I recently heard that the officer corps in the IDF was 80% drawn from individuals who are settlers or ultra-Orthodox individuals who volunteer to serve. Would you agree with that figure concerning the makeup of the IDF officer corps? If so, how does it impact those serving under them and the ability to lower the temperature in the occupied territories?
Yeah, that's definitely a phenomenon that exists. If in the beginning of Israel and the occupation and the beginning of the army as social institution that exists, in the beginning we had this very stereotypical image of the commander, which is in general the kibbutznik guy, the more secular Jew, that relates with the first waves and first political groups of the Zionist movement. And with the time, as society changes and things changes, we can see that nowadays we having this growing in settlers and Zionist religious movements, connecting their ideology and their identity with their role in the army, volunteering, and the army also creating ways for them to serve. Like in this war, in Breaking the Silence, we had testimonies, and we talk a bit about the Agomar units, which they were units in the West Bank where settlers served reserve duty in their own settlements with uniform, legitimacy, and weapons from the army. So you can imagine the consequences of this kind of ideas. So yeah, we are seeing this phenomena of the growing up in settler and religious voices in the army. It's something that we are seeing that those groups are promoting in their interpretation of reality, and it's definitely influence a lot of things that are going on in the West Bank mainly. As for example, the new ultra-Orthodox units that appear in the last few years, like trying to create a new way of service that permits ultra-Orthodox soldiers to also draft and also serve. So, and we see that when we have people that are very ideologically charged, it's in the end translates to action. And in this case is violence, control, killings.
Thank you, Luis. You know, we are here watching what is going on in Gaza, in the West Bank. And I've been a person who's been there quite a few times and am very aware of the violence of the occupation toward the Palestinian people. In light of what's happening now, what do you see? What is there any hope in your view? Because people are still talking in our government about a two-state solution, even though there are hundreds of thousands of settlers now in what was to have been Palestine. So what are your hopes for the present and the immediate future?
Yeah, those are definitely times that it's really hard to describe, right? To be in the middle of that, like on one hand to see, as you mentioned, everything that's going on in Gaza, which is something that in general Israelis don't see too much. Here in the media and in general in the public discussion, in the narratives, we are always seeing everything more or less from the soldier perspective, right? How the mission is going on, how things are developing. So we don't fully see the destruction, and I saw that when I was in the US last April when I was watching television in the US, and suddenly I saw a lot of things that they don't appear here for the general public in general, and you see the levels of destruction, and you see it's really hard to describe. So it's really hard to, like, I feel that I still have hope. We need to have hope, even though those are hard times. I think that's like what we are trying to do is breaking the silence, and I try to do as a worker in breaking silence. Of course, is a very small steps, but I think I really believe in the role of education, and I think that it's very important to bring the discussions. And we are seeing that we have people connecting the dots, opening their eyes, and seeing that we already reached a lot of moral lines, that things are unacceptable. You had here the context of the hostages that are still in Gaza and being used by the government to keep the war going on, right? The families being silenced by the government, because to have the hostages back, it means stopping the attack on Gaza. And that's something that this government very much unfortunately is not interested. They are interested to keep with the destruction, the killings. But and also if we add all the international scenario, countries related, and of course the US, we're also having a hard time with this new government and all the things that are going on, and a few of them that relates with what's going on here, right? All this issue of that we spoke before, weaponizing anti-Semitism, and those are discussions that we cannot give up on them. And it's hard, but we need to have hope. And again, about the solutions, a lot of people they're still talking about two solutions, two-state solution and things like that. And I know that nowadays that doesn't seem relevant at all. And that's because the answer I said before about solutions, right? And maybe the real solution is something that we didn't thought about, maybe something in the gray areas between these big possibilities that people discuss. But the first step that we must reach, then we didn't reach at all, is the step of political willing to generate change and to choose different kinds of leadership and to have different narratives.
Hi, Luiz, this is Tom again. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking with us. What can we do here in the US to support your group? What actions could we take? Do you need financial support? What do you need?
Of course, that financial support is very important, but I really believe in bridging in education and conversation and dialogue and diplomacy. And I know that for few people and mainly for Palestinians, it's hard to even think about this concept because living under those circumstances is absolutely really hard. And as you mentioned, it generates different ways of resistance and sometimes even violent ones. Sorry. So first of all, follow us, read our testimonies, read about our activity, talk about your friends, about what you're doing. Of course, that at the political level, talk with your representatives, really try to bring this discussion, trying to connect the dots. Something that I always fantasize about, it was about Jewish community and Palestinian community working together and generating influence from outside. And that's something that already exists that could definitely be strengthened. And it's very important to keep doing this bridge. So I always tell to people, if you have Palestinian friends, if you have Israeli friends, Jewish friends, talk with them. Say to them, oh, look, there are those guys who are saying different stuff that you probably don't hear about. They are breaking their silence and they're talking about this reality, and it's something that it's part of our lives, right? In the end, it's absolutely part of our lives. And in the case of I would say in the US, that it's a country that is absolutely related and connected with everything that's going on here. It also means a lot to every one of you. So it's very important to not give up, to not accept the silencing, and to generate actual bridging and connecting between people and generating this dialogue. And we are here for that. Of course, we are available for any kind of for material, wants to work together, wants to bring this new discussion to different groups. We have the means to do that. So say that's it mainly. Once again, thank you very much. Hope that it was significant for you all, and very happy that I could speak with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That people like Louis who become part of Breaking the Silence do risk jail time. So they're taking a risk and standing on what they believe in. So I think we need to work together. I just wanted to thank the people who made this possible. I forgot to do it at the beginning. That would be Tom, Tim